Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri. Senator, you're a member of the Republican leadership in the Senate. How confident are you that you're going to be able to block the creation of this commission in the Senate?
Well, I think it's too early to create a commission, and I believe Republicans in the Senate will decide that it's too early to create that commission. You know, commissions often don't work at all, and when they do work, like the Simpson-Bowles Commission produced a good result, nothing happened as part of that result. The one commission that we generally think did work was the 9/11 Commission, Chris. I think I was part of putting that commission together. I think it was 14 months after 9/11, after all kinds of other information was out there for that commission to look at, before that commission got started. And believe me, it would be months before this commission could get started. I just was part of the Senate Intel Committee looking into the last election, the Russian involvement in the last election. We thought that would take a year. It took 3 years, and we already had a full staff that was fully cleared to look at everything. It would take months, as Chairman Burr said the other day, former Chairman Burr of our committee. It would take months just to get a staff ready to look at things, and you've got 400 plus legal efforts going on against individuals. That's going to produce a lot of information eventually, but believe me, the Justice Department will not let a commission have any of that information. We just went through that with the effort we looked at after the last election. We got no sharing from the Justice Department about a much smaller number of cases than they're dealing with now. This information is all going to get out there. I've actually opposed the idea of a commission immediately from the very first, because I think we'll start waiting for a commission rather than moving forward with what we know we need to do now. There's a bipartisan effort in the Senate with 2 committees to produce not only a report, but also a number of recommendations, and we should be able to do that in the first full week of June, and we haven't even waited for that to decide what a commission should do.
Well, let me ask you about that. You are working with 2 committees, Senate Rules and Senate Homeland Security, both, of course, chaired by Democrats because they're in the majority. Right. And as you say, they're going to come out with a report, we think, as early as next month. But the issue is whether or not they're going to answer, and this is what Congressman Kinzinger said, some of the key questions that a lot of people have about January 6th. I want to put those up on the screen. What was President Trump doing during the riot? Did he refuse to approve sending in the National Guard? Did White House staff and the military work around Mr. Trump with Vice President Pence? Will your report with those 2 committees, will they answer those questions? And have you talked, have you subpoenaed, or have you heard from top officials in the Trump White House?
Well, we had 2 public hearings, and we've had several individual interviews with people like the acting Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Army. There's going to be a timeline that will come out that talks about what happened, when it happened. There'll be plenty of answers to the questions, I think, of why we had that 30-minute gap between the time that the Defense Department says they approved National Guard assistance and the time they told the National Guard that they'd approved that assistance.
But
there
sir,
are some questions there.
I don't mean to interrupt, but what about what was going on inside the Trump White House?
Well, I think you've got to decide what's the priority here. Is the priority to secure the Capitol, to do what we need to do to better train, better prepare Capitol Police, decide what we want to do in the future? Or is the priority to take what will be a couple of years, in my view, to decide what happened inside the White House? I think that ultimately will be out there. All kinds of books being written, all kinds of efforts to look at that. Even a commission like the 9/11 Commission started at the right time with the information they need. Won't get in the way of us doing what we need to do, but if we start a commission right now, just last week, many people in the press were saying about our report that will come out, it will be bipartisan, it will be something that Chairman Klobuchar, Chairman Peters, Rob Portman, and I all will have signed off on. When that comes out, people are saying, well, maybe we should wait until we get a report from the commission. I don't think we should wait for another year or so to decide what we need to do to respond to 9/11.
But you keep talking about the 9/11 Commission. The two chairs of the 9/11 Commission, one Republican, one Democrat, they put out a statement this week, and here's what they said. They support creation of this panel, saying unity of purpose was key to the effectiveness of the group, the 9/11 Commission. We put country above party without bias. I don't think many people or anybody is saying that your committees can't do their work. The question is whether a commission, an independent commission, no members of Congress, could serve a useful function. And as you say, it may be a year from now before they come out. Can you honestly say, in opposing this commission, coming out down the line, that you're putting country above party?
Well, I think, first of all, I think I said a minute ago what happened 9/11. Obviously, I meant what happened January 6th. Those are clearly, in my time in the Congress, the two seminal moments where the country, the capital city itself, under an attack that we wouldn't have anticipated. But I do think that the 9/11 Commission had a lot more information available to it when it started than this one would have. And we made a lot of decisions before the 9/11 Commission started that were important to further secure the Capitol, to further look at our intelligence failures. Right. We need to be doing all of those things. We'll see what my colleagues think, but there's been very little bipartisan discussion between the House and Senate on this topic.
Senator, I've got about 30 seconds here, so I need a quick answer. You're part of a Republican group trying to come up with a deal with the White House over infrastructure. They're at $1.7 trillion. You guys are, on the Republican side, are around $600 billion. Even in Washington, that's a lot of money. What do you think are the prospects for a compromise, a bipartisan compromise on infrastructure? 30 seconds.
Well, I hope we can get there. I think our best meeting on this topic was the meeting we had with the president himself and the members and a couple of cabinet officers, the Secretary of Commerce and the Secretary of Transportation. I think the president would like to get there on a bipartisan deal. Our biggest gap is not the money. Our biggest gap is defining what infrastructure is. And if we'd get to a definition of infrastructure that the country would have always accepted, that becomes a much narrower space than it appears to be right now. I do think we've got about a week or 10 days to decide if we can work together on this or not. I'd like to. I believe the president would like to. The number is too big because the scope of what the White House staff wants to call infrastructure is way too big.
Senator Blunt, thank you. Thanks for coming in today, and we'll stay on top of what happens to the commission in the Senate.